I genuinely think inflation is the worst economic evil that has ever existed. Nothing does more harm than to an economy, to society, to morals, to ethics than inflation. Democracy is a scam, right? I don't believe in
Yeah.
democracy. I believe the best way to break free from the shackles of neocolonialism, as you call it, is um, is to break free from the monetary system.
This is the Mooncast.
See you, Space Cowboy.
My man, welcome to the Mooncast. Welcome, welcome,
Um,
welcome.
it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being able to make it on time, which is great. If you could, can you just a little bit introduce yourself to the audience? Let them know who you are and what you're about.
I'm okay, great. I go by the um internet's name, Econ Bro, which is just economics bro. So I am an economist, an Austrian economist, and based in Nigeria. One of very few Austrian economists in Nigeria. I studied regular run-of-the-mill economics at university, like most people, and after that, I sought to further my education, but I had um, let me just to cut a very long story short. I eventually was drawn to the Austrian School of Economics, and then I am self-taught in the Austrian school. And today, I decided to take the lessons I've learned from the Austrian School of Economics and teach them to younger people, to people in Nigeria in general, regardless of age, group, or gender, or anything, because I genuinely believe that the Austrian School of Economics has the solution to Nigeria's problem. So basically, I host seminars where I go from university campus to university campus, talking to the students about these things. And of course, I talk to elderly people that I meet wherever I can. So basically, I'm just an evangelist for good economic policies. What I am and what I do.
Yeah, if you could, can you break down the differences and nuances between Austrian economics versus Keynesian economics?
Okay. So basically, Keynesian economics is economics of government, right? It's economics where the economy is determined. So the idea is they believe that what grows, what moves an economy, what causes growth is what they call stimulation, is spending. That's a fancy way of saying spending. So they believe that when things are tough, the government can just introduce some new money into the economy, and then they call it a multiplier effect. The government spends a trillion naira. I'm Nigerian, obviously. So the government spends a trillion naira, and then that's a trillion naira worth of jobs created for people, and those people also purchase other things and so on. So that's the idea, and it sounds sensible at first until you think first cause. Um, Interesting. I was having a discussion with some of my students this morning. We had a WhatsApp discussion, and then I said this exact same thing. Austrian economics never, I'm sorry, Keynesian economics, mainstream economics in general, whether it's Keynesian or neoclassical or even monetarist economics, who I tend to agree with the monetarists on a whole lot of issues, but they never think first cause. So no one ever asks, where did the money, the 1 trillion naira stimulus come from? And I was explaining to my students this morning that that money can only be sourced through taxation, which is contractionary fiscal policy. So by nature, taxation shrinks the economy. So it's kind of silly to think you are going to stimulate an economy to stimulate growth when in reality you are actually contracting the economy. There's a slew of problems that I can't get into unless you want me to. With
Please,
that kind.
please.
Oh, okay. Okay, fine. So still on Keynesian economics. So um, the government can only stimulate by taxing. So there are two ways basically. by taxing and through and financing through debt, right? So
Yes.
when they tax, let me focus on taxing for a bit. The student of mine asked me this morning because I wrote an article and she read it and then she had questions. So because I was condemning welfare programs, and then she said, "What happens?" She said, "If the government gives grants to businesses to build refineries and all sorts of businesses and build bridges and schools and roads and hospitals, that isn't that creating new wealth?" And then I told her to think first cause. Where did the government get the money in the first place? So when the government taxes the people, they're taking money from the people, leaving less money for consumers to consume and investors to invest. And then in doing that, so let me just focus on the investment side of things. When the investor has less money to reinvest, that means the people he would have employed by increasing those investments, by investing in more productivity. He doesn't employ them. So you have people who were not supposed to be in a job. Um, so rather, people who were supposed to have jobs, they no longer have jobs because the government has reduced the ability of the private sector to create those jobs, right, through taxation. And then so that's pretty much unemployment, right? But then people see the bridges and the roads and the people who were employed to do that and say, "See, jobs were created," but no one actually sees the jobs that would have been created if, again, think first cause. No one sees the jobs that would have been created if the government didn't tax the people in the first place. I also pointed out to her, or to the students rather, one person asked the question, but I was answering the group. I also pointed out to her the fact that there's a lot of corruption and bureaucracy and negligence when the government spends, that just makes things horrible. And it's not just a Nigerian problem, it's everywhere in the world. I'm sure most people have heard of I think it was 42 billion Joe Biden spent on high speed internet that isn't working. So it's a global thing, it's a government thing. So now that's just on the issue of taxation. So in the long run, this taxation actually causes um, lower productivity because you are taking wealth from people who are efficient at allocating, at distributing that wealth. You're taking resources from them and spending it on inefficient um, projects, right? Government projects always tend to be inefficient. That's a different story entirely. We could get into that
Why do
maybe.
why do you think that is specifically? Can you touch on that? Why is it that when the government collects the money from the tax dollars, right, from the citizens, why is it that they spend the money inefficiently? Can you break that down for the audience just to get a little bit of an idea of why it doesn't make sense for an efficient somebody who actually understands what they're doing in their particular vertical with the monies that they have to take some of that money and give it to an inefficient government who doesn't have any know-how of really how to run a business or anything. They're just really into Can you just a little bit break that down for the audience to a little bit understand?
There are so many ways or so many reasons to come at this problem. You can come at it from the economic calculation side of things, but I don't want to go into that. So let me. You can also come at it through private property. There is a sense of responsibility when something is mine, right? So, for instance, Dangote is the richest man in Nigeria. I think currently the richest man in Africa.
In Africa,
I
yeah.
tell people in Africa. So I tell people, why is he so successful? Why would you much rather subscribe to so like we used to have the Nitel, the Nigerian telecommunications company. Why would people I mean, if you bring Nitel back today, um you wouldn't have people subscribe to Nitel, right? People would much rather use Globacom, MTN, Nine Mobile, and all the other telecom service providers we have. People would much rather use DHL or UPS or any of the millions of courier services we have in Nigeria than use NiPost. Same applies to the US. People would much rather use DHL and UPS than use the USPS, right? I had some stuff sent to me, the US from the US, the USPS they fumbled over there, and then when it got here, NiPost, our own version of the USPS, also fumbled. So there is this sense of it's not. So human beings naturally are profit seeking. Human beings are profit seeking, but the government is not in the business of making profit per se. But that doesn't mean that the people who are there, who work in the government, don't have that profit seeking motive in themselves. They are thinking of how to maximize um, their own satisfaction. That's what they're thinking of, right? So when you have people in government, um, they're thinking of, so rather than think the best way to make money in as a business, the best way to make money is to provide goods and services, right? Provide goods and services, low price or affordable price, high quality, and then the money comes in. But in the government, regardless of the quality of the commodity, you get paid. So people, because of that mindset, they tend to cut corners, they tend to pad budgets because they're thinking of themselves. It's the same profit motive. It's the same profit motive. But when you have an institution like the government, um, where the government in itself is not a profit driven organization, but it is full of people who are human beings, who are profit driven, and there's no incentive for them to produce quality. It's just they just want to keep taking and taking and taking. After all, the money is still going to come through taxes and all that kind of stuff. So as I said, there are many ways to come at it, but this is just private property is one of the best ways, I think, of coming at it. And again, you said something. You mentioned the word political. I can't remember what you said after because my brain was just firing off when I heard that word. Um, for instance, we live in a society in Nigeria where we have two major religions and like I think over 200 languages, 750 local governments. So when you have that kind of situation, that kind of setup, people are not thinking of helping the country. They're thinking of helping their brother. Whether if I'm a Christian, I want to help a Christian, or if I'm a Yoruba man or an Igbo man, I want to help a Yoruba man or an Igbo man. So we're not thinking quality. We're not thinking giving to the best person, the most qualified. We're thinking, I want to help my brother in faith. I want to help my brother in ethnicity. I want to help my brother in language. So this is another reason why government um, projects tend to fail. Now, let me just use this to briefly segue into the Nordic model. There are those who sing the praises of the Nordic model, Nordic socialism, as they call it, and those countries actually happen to have much freer markets than even places like America, right? So they are actually free market countries. Only they have welfare programs, right? They have welfare programs. So people wonder, um, people say, why don't we adopt something like that in a place like Nigeria? And it most certainly cannot work here. Number one, they have small populations, and then they have homogeneous populations. They are all mostly one ethnicity, one language, one religion. So there is a sense of, so there is no I'm helping my brother because everyone is your brother in that place. Now that's why the redistribution tends to work a bit better there. In Nigeria, the Igbo man will help the Igbo, the Yoruba will help the Yoruba, the Hausa will help the Hausa, the Tiv would help the Tiv, and so on, right? And then nothing gets done, which is why one of the reasons why the Nordic model would not work here. Anyway, so back to the what I was saying about the government, about so I can't remember how I got here again. So yeah,
Yeah.
what I was saying about the government funding projects, Keynesian economics. So the
Yes.
second way they can fund projects, back to Keynesian economics, the second way the government can fund projects is by inflating the currency. Debt,
Yes.
borrowing from you can borrow from another country, which means future taxes. Or a more sinister way is inflating the currency, which I don't have to explain to anyone why that's horrible for the entire country. I genuinely think inflation is the worst economic evil that has ever existed. Nothing does more harm than to an economy, to society, to morals, to ethics than inflation. So that's Keynesian economics. No one ever thinks where did the money for the now apart from the effects I've already explained of the spending when the government actually spends the money, there are negative effects. But um, think first cause. Where did it come from? Where did the money to spend this stimulus come from? And then you have inflation and taxation, which are bad things. Now, to contrast that, Austrian economics, we believe very correctly that an economy is built through savings, real savings, real savings. So we don't just think of capital as money, but we think of capital in terms of capital goods. So if a producer, if someone, if a producer, if it doesn't have to produce, if I'm an orange farmer and I sell oranges to people and I make some money, that money wasn't created out of thin air. That money was earned because I created service. I created value. So for every naira I make, there is an orange somewhere in the economy, right? So the money represents product, it represents a good, it represents a service, it represents someone that was satisfied. So if I decide to save some of that, if I decide to save some of that money, keep it aside, then what I'm saying is I'm foregoing consumption for a period. I'm not going to consume goods and services on the market. I'm leaving those goods and services for someone else to take and, let's say, fertilizer, right? I'm leaving that
Mm-hmm.
fertilizer for someone else to take and invest in agriculture, or I'm leaving that tractor or that the cement for someone else to take and build some project. I'm leaving labor for other people who want to employ. So I'm not spending. So when I'm saving, that's what I'm saying, right? So someone else takes that money and goes and demands labor, demands resources, and then produces commodities that people will consume in the future, which is how economies grow. So again, now back to Keynesianism, where the government gets this wrong, where Keynesians get this wrong, where the MMT, the modern monetary theory crowd, gets it wrong, is that they think of, that's why I mentioned real savings. They think of capital in terms of just money. So why not just print the money and spend it? So when they print the money and spend it, so people aren't saving, people aren't foregoing consumption, they aren't they aren't letting they aren't leaving resources in the economy for other people to use and produce future products, right? So you have a situation where both consumers and producers are drawing on the same limited pool of resources at the same time, which again is what causes the scarcity and leads to um, higher prices. Basically, I've just sort of summed up or explained the Austrian business cycle theory. And then all of a sudden, because both consumer and producer are drawing on these resources at the same time. Now, please note, if the government didn't pump money into the economy, if they did not inject that fake currency into the system, then producers would not be able to demand um, um, as much resources as they do when the fake money is in there, right? So there is no overbidding, um, over struggling, over fighting for resources because the government doesn't have that. The both the government and the private sector don't have that fake money to use to make the demand, right? But when that happens, when the government prints the money, people aren't really saving. People aren't telling they aren't saying I'm leaving labor, I'm leaving resources for other people to produce. So they are consuming and people are producing at the same time, and then there aren't enough resources and labor for all projects to be completed at the same time, and then that's where you see businesses start to fail and all kinds of things because there aren't enough resources. So I at a seminar last year, I made a prediction to my students that in the coming years we were going to see a lot of businesses shut down because of what I've just explained now. And it took me a while, but I actually just noticed. I saw someone tweet something about it a few weeks ago, and then I actually went out and looked, and I noticed lots of stores are closing down, businesses are failing, and so on. So that's basically the difference between one of the major differences between the Austrian school and the Keynesian school. Um, one school, the Austrians think real savings is what is required for an economy to grow, and the other thinks the economy can grow by stimulus, the government spending. There are other differences, but this is the one
So,
I choose to focus on at this time.
so what about, in the Austrian economics sort of viewpoint? If I'm a want to start a business, how would it go in regards to raising capital? Because if you don't have this sort of debt-based sort of society, what are the alternatives to be able to raise capital to be able to produce a good or service that's beneficial to the entire society?
Well, yeah, so the problem isn't debt. The problem isn't debt. The problem isn't, let me speak of it from the other side. The problem isn't credit. People, so I once tweeted at a very major account in Nigeria about putting an end to fractional reserve banking and and the government printing money. And then he said, if we do that, productivity would grind to a halt. And I was like, you don't understand the difference between credit and expansionary credit. So
Yes.
what I just explained is debt, is credit, because when people save, people go to borrow that money. So that's debt. That's credit, right? So we don't have a problem with credit. We don't have a problem with debt, if you want to call it that. We have a problem with debt that's expansionary. We have a problem with um, credit that's expansionary. Let me put it that way. So um, how people fund projects in a non-inflationary economy? How will people fund projects if the government doesn't inject money into the system and the banks don't expand that money further? It's very simple. Um, if productivity increases, if the supply of the money is kept fixed, let's say we have something like Bitcoin that has a
Yeah.
supply cap. We have something like Bitcoin where the price is fixed. I'm sorry, the supply is fixed. As productivity increases, prices start to fall. So
Exactly.
all prices are falling relative to Bitcoin, right? Prices are rising relative to other currencies, but relative to Bitcoin, prices just tend to be falling. The Bitcoiners are getting richer and richer as productivity increases. Right? Imagine how it would be if there was um, no hindrance to productivity from governments through taxation and regulation. Just imagine where Bitcoin would have. Imagine the Bitcoin price. So my point is, people have this silly idea that if there is no money injected into the system, then people won't have access to new credit. But what they forget, what they overlook, is the fact that the existing money rises in its value and can now command more goods and services than it could before. So there is more money now. Only so what people look at the nominal value, right? 10 um 10 trillion naira, for instance. That's what people look at. And then they say expand the money supply to 20 trillion naira. So they say we have more money, but we actually have less purchasing power. But if 10
Exactly.
trillion naira is 10 trillion naira, but 10 trillion naira can now buy two times more than what it could buy a year ago, then that's real productivity. That's real growth. So there still will be a lot of money for people to take out loans and invest in products, in goods and services. The only thing is and it's not a bad thing. It's good. The nominal value of the money, the 10 trillion naira, remains the same. So I don't know if I explained that clearly.
Yes, you explained it. You explained it really, really well. I want to shift over to when did this concept of fiat currency and credit expansion get introduced in Nigeria?
From the very beginning, and by that I mean when the colonial people introduced uh yeah, so because before we used cowries as
Yes,
money, some people use iron hose, nails, salt, all kinds of things as money. Those were commodity monies, and they did have some level of inflation, right? If someone discovered a stock of cowries somewhere, a new beach or something, then the money supply would increase, but it was controlled, right? But when the West brought money here, when they brought uh, although when they came here, it wasn't actually fiat money, so money still held its value relatively, at least, back then. But then everything, I would say, went to hell around the early 1900s, when the so I had notes on this for a show I did, the What Is Money podcast with Robert Breedlove, brilliant guy. So I don't have that right now in front of me, but basically, I'm saying that to say I'm foggy on the dates. If the dates are off, I apologize.
And if I can bridge the diaspora, then I can sleep comfortably at peace. And I think that Web3 is the missing ingredient to make that happen. So I'll teach it.
So sometime around the early 1900s, with the um, with the establishment of the Federal Reserve, that, of course, we know the world was still on a gold standard at that time, but then they kept printing more paper, the more bills than the gold they had in reserves. You know the whole story with Bretton Woods and all that stuff. So sometime around the 1950s, um, or the I think 1953, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember the date. Don't quote me on that. But the problem became
For
much
Bretton
worse
Woods?
when we established. No, no, not from
You,
no. Bretton Woods was 1933 or so. But I'm saying
1944.
I'm for Bretton Woods.
Yes, it was right after World War
Was it?
II. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was in the 1930s. What am I quoting then? Anyway, the 1953 thing I'm saying is when the Nigerian Central Bank was established. Thereabout. So that's when everything went to hell, when we started to control our own currency. Just interesting side story. Um, Maybe not that interesting. So the Nigerian naira used to be in 2011. If you take 1,000 naira to the Benin Republic, to the south of Nigeria, southwest of Nigeria, to Chad, those countries that use the franc CFA, the currency for the West African francophone countries. If you take 1,000 naira, you could get 4,000 CFA in 2011. Last I checked, 1,000 naira would get you about, I think, maybe 900 or 600 francs, 600 francs now,
Wow.
right? So it's not like things are getting better there. It's that the currency is getting devalued here. Now it's not like their currency isn't getting devalued there, but because their currency is controlled by France, and France prints their currency. They don't just print France doesn't print their currency recklessly, right? So on some level, having our own government control our currency has made things far worse, because the power to just inflate the currency exists, and um, they say power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Um, when people have that power, they will eventually make use of that power. So, and the Buhari government dialed money inflation to 11, and then of course the government after him, the APC Tinubu-led government, is even doing much worse. So yeah, to put you can't exactly pin the exact point where inflation became a very big problem here, but 1953, with the establishment of the central bank, is surely a pivotal point in the fiat inflation phenomenon in Nigeria.
When was Nigeria get their independence? Because what 1957 was Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, right? So when
Yeah,
did Nigeria get their independence?
1960.
So you already had the establishment of the federal bank.
The central
Who was
bank. Yeah.
the central bank? So who was controlling the central bank at that point in time before you guys were able to get the independence?
I think it was the British. Let me give me a second to look it up. As I said, I'm foggy on the details because it's I'm more concerned with the economics than I am with the history.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so I'm not very clear on the details, but I believe the British were in control at the time. You know.
Okay. And was there a point in time when the inflation rates weren't as accelerated as they are currently right now, where they were kind of reaching closer to parity with the dollar?
Oh yeah, in the when we first switched from the pounds, Nigeria used the pounds because obviously we're
Mm-hmm.
colonized by the British. So our currency was just a derivative of the British pound. So when we switched, I think in the 1970s, I think a dollar was equal to um, or rather, I think one naira was equal to $2 or something of the sort. Again, please forgive me for not having the exact details, but it was. I mean, every Nigerian who listens to this, who watches this, just has a vague idea because we hear stories from our parents of from the days when one naira equaled a dollar and that kind of thing. So, yes, there was a time when they were equal thereabouts, but then our leaders started to inflate the currency gradually, and then the naira started to fall in value. And currently, the naira is about 1,400. The dollar rather is about 1,400 naira. So yeah.
Um,
So okay.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the worst inflation we've had, at least in my lifetime, is in the past 8 to 10 years. Since 2015, things got very, I mean, things got very terrible. Um, in from like 10 years ago. So yeah.
Wh- What is money today in Nigeria, and how has the money printing and the inflation affected the economy overall, in terms of crime levels, in terms of how people are looking at the outlook of business? How is it affecting the economy? What is money today in Nigeria?
Money today in Nigeria is the Nigerian naira. We have we used to have access to cryptocurrencies, um, but the government that got sworn in last year, in May of last year, they cracked down on the use of cryptocurrencies and even on the so in Nigeria, Nigerians could someone can send me the US dollar and I'll go to the bank and withdraw the US dollar, but we can't do that anymore. We can't, um, we can't. So just another interesting um, story, fact, if you will. Up until, as I said, one could send you the dollar and then you just go to the bank. They send you $100. You go to the bank and withdraw $100 cash. You know, but sometime earlier in the year, since they implemented the restrictions on currencies, on foreign currencies and cryptocurrencies, um, someone sent me about let's see, about 1.4 million naira worth of dollars, right? I can't remember what the dollar amount was at the time. And by the time it got to me, because I can no longer go to the bank and withdraw dollars because of this policy. I ended up getting $1.1 million, because 1.1 million naira, sorry, because the government made the conversion and skimmed some off the top. So that's just so
So
that's
not
my
not
labor.
so not only are they stealing from you in the form of inflation, then they also feel the need to tax you for
Yeah,
intercontinental transactions. That's
yeah,
that's insane. So
yeah,
what what is the current alternatives there? Like if you want to have a business and say your demand, some of the demand is outside of Nigeria and other countries, how are people able to receive and send payments? Because I did hear that there's a lot of like restrictions going on. And this is the thing, this is another issue I have with fiat, right? This ideal of Bitcoin, right? The permissionlessness of it and the decentralization of it, it just makes more sense to send and receive value that way than to wait for someone to give you restrictions and then steal from you multiple times, because they're already stealing from you through the
yeah,
form of inflation, stealing from you with taxes, and then they want to steal from you when you withdraw and when you deposit, right? So how are people being able to bypass the situation now currently to be able to facilitate intercontinental and intercontinental trade?
Of course, there where there's a will, there's always a way. So it's more difficult now. By the way, it's not difficult for the elite in society. If Dangote wants to get his dollars, he goes straight to the central bank. If the politicians, I'm not going to say too much, but I know the wife of a top official in this country who pays her staff in US dollars, but it's forbidden for me to use. So people can get it, but for the elite in society, and I use that word, I don't use it to mean the elite. I just use it to mean the financial elite in the country. They can easily, they have access to it. Rules for us, but not for them. Um, Now, for people like us to get access to cryptocurrencies or foreign currencies, it just costs us a lot more. It costs us a lot more. For instance, there are services like Gray Finance, like Swift Pay, Payoneer, and many of these services that one can use to make payments outside. Like if you want to buy stuff um, outside the country, the average, but it comes at an extra cost because you have to pay for their service, and they skim, they take a cut out of literally every transaction. So we can do it, but it's more expensive. Now, receiving, on the other hand, receiving payments, I personally have not found a way yet. Everything I found is very, very expensive. So I just go with the flow. Whenever I'm sent money to this part of the world, to Nigeria, of course, what I explained, the government just skims some off the top.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So when I look at Nigeria and I see how many different sort of ethnic groups there are, you got the House of Fulani, you have the Igbo, you have Yoruba, and you have all these different ethnic groups in between. When I look at the political landscape, I see the political nepotism. Then you have the currency instability and everything. How, if you were somebody in a position of power, what do you think would be the steps to be able to help to fix a lot of the problems to create economic prosperity in Nigeria?
okay, so things are usually not as simple as we like to think they are.
Of
So
course.
um, if I was sole dictator of Nigeria, right? I'm telling you what I would do. I'm not saying now there are limitations. If a democratically elected president tries to do some of these things, he will succeed, but it's going to be very difficult. I mean, we've seen what's happening in Argentina. President Javier Milei
Yes.
is trying to push back against the corruption, the evil in the system, and the system is pushing back, right? Nigerians tend to be very, very docile when it comes to pushing back against corruption, against evil. But I
Why?
can almost guarantee, I think it has something to do with our culture. We have a big respect culture here. Respect your elders, respect your parents, respect everyone in society. So some people extend this respect to the state, to government authority, right? And now I'm not making a comment on whether or not that's good, but I'm saying that's where it draws from. So I think it has to do with our culture, right? So, but I suspect, however, that if we have someone like a Javier Milei who tries to fix the system, I believe the quiet, docile Nigerians will stand up and fight against him. Anyway, so what I would do if I was in charge of Nigeria, I tagged my seminars fixing the Nigerian economy in 3 steps. It sounds it's a very bold claim, but it's literally all that I believe is required. It's actually the 3 steps is just one step if you think about it. Well, I like to break down. So the one step is private property rights, right? That's the one step. Well, I break it down into, if you have right to property, to your property, to own property, then no one has right to tax your property, right? So the
Yes.
first step is cutting taxes, right? So that's the first step. So the second step is cutting regulation. Again, this still has to do with private property, because as long as I'm not harming the next man, no one has the right to tell me what to do with my property because it's mine. So nobody should tell me what to produce, for whom to produce, how to produce, at what quantities to produce, because it's my property, right? So if you take away regulation, which again, as I said, private property, then productivity will grow. And then the third step, so the first is cut taxes, second is cut regulation, and then the third and most important step is putting an absolute stop to inflation. Now, you can do this, there are many ways to do this. There is the government way of stopping the central bank from having any operations, but that's futile, because if you give it, once another president comes, he can easily just undo that, right? So um, the smarter way to do it would be um, to change the monetary system, right? Adopt sound money. You know, I personally am more of a gold and silver kind of guy, but make let there be no legal tender laws. If you want to get paid in Bitcoin or Monero, or even, God forbid, if anyone would be so crazy, Ethereum. You know, if you want to if if you want to get paid in any of those currencies, that's fine. It's your choice. If you want to get paid in gold, so abolish legal tender laws, shut down the central bank, and then let the best money win. So by
Yes.
the time, let the soundest, the hardest money win. By the time you do this 3 4 years, and Nigerians have tasted, of course, I did say shut down the central bank, right? By the
Yeah.
time you do this and Nigerians have tasted good sound money, and they see the central bank is absolutely useless, and not just useless but an evil organization, when they see this, someone can't come, someone can, but it will be very difficult to come convince the people after 8 years that we need to bring back the central bank and impose the naira on the people, right? So that would be the third step, putting an end to inflation, and I would do that by abolishing all legal tender laws and letting people decide what money is best. Let the market choose. We might end up having 3 or 4 monies, right? Some people, like myself, I said I favor gold and silver because it's substantive. It's something I can hold in my hands, right? Some people would prefer Bitcoin, or some people prefer Bitcoin. Some people prefer, like myself, I like Monero as well because of the privacy. So if I want to do something that I don't want anyone to know about, I can pay in Monero or ask to be paid in Monero, because of the privacy. So of course there are trade-offs to whatever money you. So with Bitcoin, inflation is zero. With
Yeah.
Monero, you would have some inflation, but then you have privacy. We don't yet have that privacy to the extent Monero has with
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
There,
And
there
then
is
with
some
gold
inflation.
and
There is some inflation in Bitcoin, but it lowers every single 4 years as the block rewards decrease.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
But it's
I'm
deflationary.
assuming I'm assuming the supply has capped. I'm assuming when in 2000,
Oh,
and
okay.
when is the supply? Yeah, yeah, that's what. Yeah.
21,
So that's
2140. Yeah, yeah,
2140. Wow, that's
yeah,
far.
yeah,
So
yeah,
so I'm assuming 2140, right? So
yeah.
so yeah, so that's basically those three steps. So again, tying inflation to property rights, because I tied taxation and regulation to property rights. Your money is the fruit of your labor. It's the fruit of your mixing of your labor with the land to create products, right? And then money
Yeah.
is the representative of that. I mix my labor with natural resources and I make a product, and then I trade that product for something that stores value, like money. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
money is my labor, it's my property, right? So no one has the right to counterfeit my property or to tell me how to use my property. So that's why I said all three um, solutions to Nigeria and the world's economic problems can be summarized in property rights, under
Yeah.
property rights. So that's what I would do.
When you look at the lack of homogeny in Nigeria, do you think it would be hard to? So this is one of these theories that I had, that when the colonizers came to Africa, I don't know if democracy was always the right form of governance, and maybe benevolent dictatorship could be something more efficient than democracy. But I don't know what you think about that specifically. I know it's a little bit off the economic landscape of things, but
So,
yeah,
let me ask: are you African? I get the feeling you're Nigerian or something.
yeah, I'm Nigerian too.
Okay, good. So on some
Yeah,
level, we think, despite your accent, I know on some level we think alike. So,
yeah,
um, democracy is a scam, right? I don't believe in
yeah,
democracy at all. I don't believe in democracy. And being and so my political leaning is my political philosophy is anarcho-capitalism. So I am an anarchist. I believe in anarchy. So I don't believe the state should exist. However, we live in a statist world. If I could choose, um, a benevolent dictatorship isn't much different from a monarchy, like, because when the dictator of North Korea passes, he's going to hand it down to his children. So it's pretty much a monarchy. So I
yeah,
would, if you were to ask me to pick between a democracy and a benevolent dictatorship and a monarchy, I would, in a heartbeat, to hell with democracy, right? Um, I don't know if you've read Hans Hermann Hopper's Democracy, the God That Failed book. It's a very brilliant book. So he talks about monarchies there and why some of the evils that take place under democracy are much harder under monarchies, you know.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Well,
I agree that we would be better served with a benevolent in Nigeria, a benevolent dictator than we would be with democracy.
yeah, when you talk about a stateless society, how does that look like to you? What's your depiction of that? How would that work? How would it be efficient if there's no police? Would the community be policing? How do you look at government ran programs like public health care and etc. Like how do you look at that whole landscape of things, education and so
So,
on?
okay, so let me start with education. Government education is a relatively new phenomenon. Government schools didn't exist until, I don't think they've existed for up to 200 years. But then we've had school for what, 500, 600. I mean, proper school. We've had schools for thousands of years,
Thousands of
right?
years, Timbuktu.
Thousands of, yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean, the Greek philosophers would have students who would come to them, pay, and those
the
were the
Moors.
civilizations that yeah, those were the civilizations that led to the world we currently have. So government education, as much as it seems like the world would collapse without it, is relatively new, and in my opinion, it's a failed experiment. We should do away with it. Same applies to hospitals. Hospitals did exist before governments got involved. They did, and they were affordable. And now some people might jump and say healthcare wasn't as great, and education, of course, they weren't as great when the government wasn't involved, thus falsely attributing the advancements in technology, the advancements in education. We're supposed to attribute it to technology, but they would say it's the government that did, which is a filthy lie. It's just there is correlation, but it doesn't mean correlation equals causation. The fact that the government entered education and healthcare around the time things started to get better does not mean the government is responsible. It's actually capitalism. It's innovation. It's it's sound money anyway. But let me not go off into that. So healthcare, education, all these things would work much better without the state, I believe. And then for things like security, I can give practical. I mean, back to education and healthcare. um, Assuming, so what's the problem with healthcare, private healthcare and education today? The only problem is that it's expensive compared to government services, and they are actually expensive because of government regulation. That's just it. If you take away government regulation, the supply of those commodities, because healthcare is a commodity, education is a commodity, the supply would increase because they're currently very expensive on the private sector. So once you take away the regulations, everybody and their grandmother would jump in to invest in those places because people want profit. And then as the supply increases, the prices would fall. And of course, the supply increases wouldn't just come. Um, it's not just people pumping out schools because they're competing, right, to make that um, money. So the quality would also improve. So the quality would vastly increase of both healthcare and education services if the government stays out of it. Now, for security, we already have private security companies in the country. We already have thousands of them in Nigeria. We have them everywhere in the world. And um, first of all, coverage. When it comes to coverage, the police, Nigeria is under policed, as is America and everywhere else in the world, right? But everyone has a private. Most places in Nigeria here have most housing estates have private security companies, and they are well covered. So the only difference would be for them to have the right to protect themselves to do their jobs with arms, right? With arms. And then people say there'll be chaos in the streets. They'll start killing people. I'm like, first of all, if they want to kill people, they can also use knives and other kinds of weapons. Secondly, that would not happen because um, don't forget they are working for money. If they any company that has a reputation for its security agents killing people on the streets, they go out of business. So there is an incentive to ensure that that doesn't happen. So actually, policing would not be a problem and under a stateless society. By the way, the same applies to national defense. But
Yeah.
Hey bro, I'm just trolling is something that will not just challenge your perspective, but also touch your heart and soul. It's a book that defies convention, blending art and literature into a thought-provoking masterpiece. A reflective piece of provocative art that tackles societal constructs from angles you've never considered. Hey bro, I'm just trolling delves into the very essence of our existence. It questions the technology that surrounds us, challenges our notions of beauty, stares unflinchingly into the eyes of death, and questions the boundaries of freedom. It scrutinized the educational system that molds our very future. This book is a journey, an exploration of shared human experience, and it's a work of art that refuses to be confined by tradition. It's a canvas painted with words, a melody of thought, and a testament to the power of creativity in a world dominated by algorithms and data. Visit moonboycapitalventures.com and get your hands on Hey Bro, I'm Just Trolling today. It's not just a book, it's a movement. Now let's jump back into the show.
How would you, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about the national defense, and how do you then control and regulate the people coming in your country, coming out of your country? How would you see those things getting regulated or controlled or monitored?
why would you need people not coming into your country? Like I'm genuinely asking, like, what's the
Yeah.
why don't you want people to come in?
Well, I mean, we tried that before and then we got colonized. So this is why I'm.
Well, okay, so that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
so first of all, we didn't have a choice then. We didn't have a choice. It's not like they had superior firepower, right? So
Yeah.
if you have it, let's assume Nigeria is a stateless society, so it's like different communes. Um, um, so we currently have 36 states and one federal capital. So I believe the communes are going to be much smaller, but let's assume it's just 36, 37 for the sake of simplicity. So you have 37 communes, working together. So one has to consider if a country is coming in to colonize, right? Um, what are they coming to do? They want to come and they are not they don't want to rule for the sake of ruling. They want to rule for the sake of profits. Money is their goal. But then think about it. Without the state, they can come in, take whatever resources they want. Just go to unoccupied land, or you could go to occupied land and pay rather than pay trillions to your army. You just, sir, you have oil in your land. I would like to buy your land, right? Give him an offer he can't refuse. He gives you the land, you start extracting oil, and then you sell. So what's the incentive for them to colonize when everything is free for people to do voluntarily? But let's assume that there's some lunatic that just wants power, right? In a stateless Nigeria, most people would be armed. Most people would be
Is
armed. And
would you
yeah,
see that as a benefit, like a net positive or a net negative, if most people are
um,
armed?
I see it as a net positive. A lot of people would disagree, but I see it as a net positive. I believe that if you grant Nigerians the right to bear arms today, or oh sorry, the power just went out, you know. Um, so if you grant Nigerians the right to bear arms, let me just use that language for now. The rights don't come from government; they actually come from whether you believe in God or natural rights. They don't come from the government. But let me use that language. People have this idea that there will be riots in the streets and all that. As things currently stand, yes, that's going to happen. A lot of people would be very frustrated and would act out their frustrations against government and against people they think are responsible for their. So I don't deny that. So now what I'm assuming is the kind of economy I've described where everything is okay, right? So you won't have as many frustrated people. So that once you solve the economic problems, once most people are fed, are clothed, and have homes over roofs over their heads, you are less likely to have people want to do crazy stuff, right? So once that is out of the way, we still have genuine crazies in the world.
Yeah.
But if um, everyone is armed, so now let me ask you this. I'll get back to that, but let me ask you this question: if you lived in Nigeria and you owned a gun, would you go on a killing spree?
No.
Would you go on a killing spree? So why
No.
do you assume everyone else would?
I don't. I think it would depend on the economic circumstances before that law would be in place. You know, if you look at Switzerland, for instance, you know, they have a lot of people have guns in Switzerland, but it's
Yeah,
very peaceful. Whereas you look at the United States, there's a lot of gun crime. So it really depends on the economic outlook, landscape, and current conditions of the climate, economically speaking, to be able to facilitate such an ideal. But I do wonder too about potential settling disputes and how that would work if there's no court system. Would that be like a communal thing? It's a very interesting. I don't discredit the idea. I'm
yeah,
open to it, but I just wonder how it could be implemented because I'm a very open-minded person. So
yeah.
yeah,
Um, Dr. Robert Murphy of the Mises Institute has a book called Chaos Theory, where he explains how legal systems would work in an anarchist in a stateless society. So, first of all, we already have arbitration today all over the world. Not every case is settled in a federal or a state or a local court, magistrate court. I think that's what they're called here. So
yeah,
not every case is settled by the government. Some are settled by arbitrators. Lawyers just get together and they get some credible person as a judge, and that person. Then the lawyers make their case, and then they settle those disputes that way. We still have community courts. We have religious houses. So my point is, even law can be privatized, right? If it's a commodity, which it is, if people are willing to pay for it, which people are willing to pay for these services today, um,
yeah,
then the market can handle it better. So there
yeah,
would be private courts. Yeah. So I think the only problem that people would have with the only questions rather that people would ask with private courts is how do you enforce things? Because people would say, so in a private court, if maybe I have a dispute with someone about some land, who was the first to homestead the land and that kind of stuff, or someone steals my TV or something, In that kind of situation, people will be concerned. How do you get the person to show up in private courts, right? Because it's consent, it's voluntary. Both parties have to consent. Now, if if someone refuses in that kind of situation to show up in court, that's already um no, it's not like I can force my judge on the person, right? Both of us have to agree that this is the judge we want, right? If everyone, if we go through 10 judges and you're like, I don't want this judge, he's from your tribe, I don't want this judge for whatever, people, I mean, there will be, the power is back on, right? There will be impartial judges that we can go to. If one refuses to go to an impartial judge, he already, um, he already he's already assumed guilty, right? Because why is he making up excuses? Why doesn't he want to show up in court, right?
Right.
So let's assume he steals my TV.
Yeah.
Then, since he has refused to go to the court, I could easily just I'll go to the court just like normal courts, government courts, present my case, and then the judge investigates. And then, of course, there will be security agencies who, as many have suggested or have proposed, will work in would work with insurance or could work with insurance companies. There will be these security agencies that you can take a report from the court, you can take a report from the court and to those agencies, and they would enforce. Now, why this is even much better than having government courts and government policing is that if someone is found guilty of taking my TV, for instance, the government can, um, in trying to get that TV, the government can shoot and kill the person and innocent people because he stole the TV. But
Yeah.
because no private company wants that heat, that backlash, they will find the absolute best way, the safest way to to get that TV back without any collateral damage, without killing
Yeah.
someone. But today, the police kill people for much less than stealing televisions, and nothing ever happens. So I think it will be a chaotic system at first, but I think it will find its I think it will balance in a couple of years and things will be fine. We're just so used to doing the state doing things for us that we can't see a world where the state doesn't do stuff for us.
Yeah, like I said, it's a very interesting concept. I would definitely take that recommendation for that book of that stateless society that you speak about. I want to shift over to talk a little bit about the fiat and how it damages. For instance, if you look at the francophone countries, and how they use it kind of like as a weaponry tool to keep developing countries down. When you try to ask for a loan, IMF is charging a different loan rate as opposed to a country that's more favorable like a France or a Germany when they ask for that same kind of loan, and how that sort of cripples a lot of African countries too as well. And I want to talk about how a world without fiat, and if we introduce the more of a freer market, how these institutions and establishments would go away. Because what's essentially happening is we are trading natural resources and cheap labor for a money that basically is used as a weapon to keep us in chains in the form of neocolonialism. And I was wondering if you saw it the same way, and if you see a world where there is no fiat, or fiat is one of the tools and mechanisms that people use to transact, and it's more of a freer market where you have options of Bitcoin, you have options of gold, or other different forms of trade, BRICS currency potentially. Do you see that as a potential way in which we could free up Africa, and so Africa can finally be more prosperous economically speaking in the future?
Yes, I believe the best way to break free from the shackles of neocolonialism, as you call it, is to break free from the monetary system. And I mean, it's so. I think it's so simple. I don't get why people. I mean, even before we had cryptocurrencies, right? We've always had. Take Ghana for instance.
Mm.
Ghana is the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
very rich in gold. You know,
Yeah.
um, there's gold that they have to escape the monetary system. Imagine having a proper gold back currency, um, not Bretton Woods, not any of the rubbish, not what BRICS claim they are going to do. I mean, an actual gold backed currency where there is no currency printed um, above the gold they have in reserves. Just imagine how powerful that currency would be,
That's
right?
what
It
Burkina
would
Faso is
rival.
doing.
It would rival. I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
Let's see how long that lasts. I'm very skeptical about military. Those guys tend to be very socialist, right? When they run out of money, they will start to inflate the currency on top of the gold. So I don't think they will stand on principle. But so far, so good. But I don't believe it's going to last long. Anyway, we'll see. Again, that's again one of the problems with the state, right? When they run out of money, they start to look for ways, and they must spend. So they start to do all sorts of crazy things. Anyway, so just imagine if Ghana switches or Nigeria switches to a gold or a silver standard. I mean, now let's leave out cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are a game changer. They make it much easier to do, right? But just because it's there's really no cost, right? Or very little cost to switch to a Bitcoin standard compared to gold.
Yeah.
You know, um, so just imagine if um we had um a gold backed currency, a proper gold currency, redeemable currency in Nigeria, right? Um, at some point, I think nations will come to Nigeria to take loans because our currency is stable. Our currency is stable. Again, loans are a very when governments take loans, I think it's very stupid. I think it's very stupid. I keep thinking about it. If the government, rather than borrowing the dollar or borrowing whatever, or the euro or any other currency, let's think of the naira, for example. If the government has no money, if the government has no money and it wants to build roads and bridges and schools, instead of borrowing the US dollar from the IMF that they have to pay back with interest at an exorbitant cost, and I mean, not to talk of the other terms that they are going to attach to the terms and conditions for the loans. So imagine if the Nigerian government says, at the end of the day, we are going to convert the US dollar to the naira and spend it here because people don't get paid. People don't take dollars to the market to buy tomatoes and fish, right? So if the government says, instead of borrowing from, now this isn't what I would do, but I'm just saying, like, instead of borrowing from the US, why don't we borrow the naira from now? This is a bad idea. I'm just saying it's better than what they're currently doing by inflating the currency. So instead of borrowing from the US, why not borrow from banks in Nigeria? So what that means is that the demand for the naira has increased. So you have the government, you have businessmen, you have consumers bidding for the same naira. So the value of the naira goes up. Instead, they take the extra step of borrowing the dollar, then using that dollar to come demand the naira, which does the same thing they are trying to do. Do you see how
Yeah.
weird that is? So they tack on the extra step of borrowing the dollar, and I believe
Yeah.
you get what I'm saying. So
Yeah,
instead of
I
inflating the
understand.
currency or borrowing from outside, borrow from the country.
Yeah.
You are only increasing the demand for the currency, causing its value to rise. Now, I'm not encouraging governments taking borrowing money, because at the end of the day, we're still going to have to pay that debt through taxes. So,
Yeah.
so I'm just
The
saying
problem.
the most.
I know they issued this is the problem with a lot of African governments, right? Yeah, it's a better strategy, but I remember they tried that in Ghana, where they issued out treasury bonds for people to be able to buy them, and the people bought them, and then they went to go collect their bonds, and they said they didn't have the money. And so this is again one of the issues that you end up having is how trustworthy is the government going to be in regards to paying back the citizens. And these are part of the issues that you have with the corrupt state. And how they kind of are wired and hardwired to just continue stealing from people. And I think there's, like I said, there's good people there trying to make good initiatives, in Africa. But I wanted to ask you what you thought or what you think the state of Africa is going to be 20 years from now, and the state of money in Africa is going to be 20 years from now.
I don't have a clue. I have no idea what's going to happen 20 years from now. If you asked me last year how this year was going to be, there are certain things I could tell you with absolute certainty. I could have told you with absolute certainty that inflation was going to rise, but no one knows what's going to happen in 20 years. For
Yeah.
instance, there is a, let me speak for Nigeria because I know a couple of things going on here. I know that there is a young man who is secretly um, trying to run for office here. He's a young man. He's in his 40s. He has very very big political connections. You know, he's the middle. He's the big politicians here can't work without their middlemen, right?
Yes.
So they have no connection to the people. So they work through these middlemen. So this guy is a leading middleman in this country. This young man is fed up of the nonsense his boss has been doing. So he has decided to take his infrastructure, his political infrastructure, and run for office himself. Now, this man is a socialist, but I've been having talks with him. Now, this guy is very, very well connected. I can't go into detail because he hasn't announced his candidacy yet, but he's very well connected. He's very well connected. Let me know. I'm not going to say any more than that. Um, so this young man, he is a socialist, but I have his ear. I've been talking with him. I met him through. I'm not going to say how I met him because that would let if certain people listen to this interview, they would know who I'm talking about. Anyway, so I met him and he was very interested in the things I had to say. He was curious. He's still very socialist in his leanings, but um, I'm making progress with him. So imagine if that kind of person actually, even if he doesn't win the election, imagine imagine if I help be his economic advisor, right? And
Yeah.
I draw up a proposal for him and the message gets out and more. Now, the biggest problem I have here is exposure, getting the message out, right? As I said, there
Yeah.
are only a handful of us who think the way I do in this country. So the problem is getting the message out. So imagine having that kind of messaging using such a potentially big platform, right? So that could change things in the next 20 years. So again, it's all speculation. I don't know what's going to happen. For all I know, the guy might kick me um out of his campaign maybe 2 months from now or 3 years from now. Who knows? So I can't say with absolute certainty what will happen. But I am optimistic. Even if things go badly, I still have my work going on for me. I still have the young people that I'm teaching, and tomorrow those young people are going to become teachers. Those young people are going to become teachers and businessmen and politicians, and you know they'll be the leaders of tomorrow, as they say. So hopefully, something comes out of that as well. But I can't make any predictions.
When it comes to what is it like living in a hyperinflationary environment?
Horrible.
How is it?
There's
Is there savings? Do people think about saving for tomorrow, or is it just making money fast? What does it do to people's psyche?
Oh, okay. That's what you're asking. So yeah, the no one saves. No one
Yeah.
saves. So there was a report that came out a couple of years ago that says that only less than 0.6% of Nigerians have um, over 500,000 naira in their bank accounts. That's
Wow.
I think about $400 or so, if I'm not mistaken. Thereabouts.
Yeah.
Only only about 0.6% of the banked Nigerians have more than $400 in their account. That's terrible. So obviously, no one is saving. Right. I mean, you can't say in an inflationary economy, but beyond the economic effects, or let me say, in addition to the economic effects, or as a result of the economic effects of inflation, we also have some cultural consequences. Like theft, robbery, prostitution, kidnappings, ritual killings. All these things have greatly increased, especially since 2021, when the inflation was dialed up, by President Buhari's, the last president administration. So those things, they've always been there. We've always had kidnappers and thieves and robbers and prostitutes and ritual killers, but it has amplified since the currency became almost worthless, because people have less money to meet their needs, and then when that happens, they become desperate, and then they start to do very unsavory things. So that's where we are at now. Society is in absolute um, moral decline. We're headed towards only God knows what. Let's see how it goes.
Are you optimistic about the next 5 to 10 years in Nigeria?
No, no. This doesn't mean I'm not hopeful. Um, so I know it sounds a bit contradictory. I am not optimistic about Nigeria the next 5 to 10 years, but so I don't know if you're a religious person, but I'm a Christian, and I believe the biblical narrative that the world isn't going to get better. I only believe that there can be tiny pockets of relief here and there, but I don't think the world is headed towards nirvana. I don't think things are going to get better in this world. So, as a Christian, I believe that. However, um, this doesn't stop me from working, doing my part to make sure society is improved. As a matter of fact, as a Christian, it is my duty to, despite the fact that I know that the world is going to hell in a handbasket, it's my duty as a Christian to keep doing good regardless of the outcome. So that's why I said I have hope, or I'm, even though there is pessimism, even though I'm pessimistic, I'm still doing what I can. Maybe, perhaps, God might look favorably on my work on Nigeria and make things better, even if it's temporarily. But yeah, that's But politically, no, I have no optimism about Nigeria at all.
Econ Bro, any last words before we go, man?
Um, it's great to be here. I hope things get better. I hope we would I hope if I'm ever invited back on your show, I would be able to have positive news and say things have gotten better in the country. So um yeah, if you'd like to support my work, if you are listening to this, maybe you'd be pleased to put my links in the
Of
description
course.
or whatever.
Where can
Yeah,
people find you
yeah.
on the
So
internet?
I'm on Twitter at my handle is at Econ Bro, spelled EconBreau. So everything I do, I post on Twitter. That's and what you can. My DMs are always open. You can reach me on Twitter, and that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again for this. And this concludes this episode of the Mooncast, man. And peace.